October 1945. Three hands bound and faces pale with stark fear
sat in the chilling confines of a military transport truck. Their destination was clear. A prisoner of war camp nestled in rural Nebraska. What remained unknown to them, however, was that in less than 48 hours, they would find themselves seated around a family's dining table, sharing apple pie with individuals they had been rigorously taught to view as enemies. This is the remarkable narrative of how a single farmer's profound act of human kindness irrevocably altered these women's perceptions of Americans, of the brutal reality of war and of the enduring potential for grace, even amidst humanity's darkest chapters. 5 months prior, the European war had concluded. Yet for Maria Hoffmann, Anna, and Elizabeth Kruger, the true nightmare was just commencing. Captured near Berlin while performing duties as military communications operators.
All right, move it.
Their status as female prisoners of war propelled them into an indeterminate future predicament, largely unaddressed by the Geneva Conventions. The truck's engine grumbled to a halt outside Camp Robinson, a hastily erected facility enclosed by formidable barbed wire and shadowed by towering watchtowers. 22-year-old Maria pressed her face against a narrow window, her gaze sweeping across seemingly endless cornfields stretching to the horizon. She had never before departed Germany, nor had she ever envisioned setting foot on American soil under such grim circumstances. "Stay close," Anna whispered to her younger companion. Elizabeth, a mere 19, her fair hair plastered to her scalp, her blue eyes wide with terror, had been apprehended while attempting to destroy radio equipment ahead of the Soviet advance. Now, she clutched a small wooden crucifix, a cherished gift from her grandmother, and her sole remaining possession. Camp Commander Colonel James Patterson reviewed their files with mounting apprehension. Female prisoners of war constituted a rare anomaly, presenting unique logistical and ethical quandaries. The camp's single women's barrack was already severely overcrowded, and the atmosphere among its inmates was palpably tense. The 3 new arrivals had already endured 2 assaults from other prisoners, who vehemently accused them of prolonging the war through their communications work. "We cannot keep them here," Patterson confided to his aide. "The other prisoners regard them as collaborators. It's simply not safe." He gazed out his office window at the golden Nebraska landscape, his thoughts drifting to his own daughters back home. These women, too, were someone's daughters, swept into circumstances far beyond their control. That night, as the autumn wind rattled the barrack windows, Maria overheard 2 guards discussing their fate. "Transported to the women's facility in Texas has been delayed again," one remarked. "Could be weeks before we can move them." The other guard shook his head grimly. "They won't survive weeks here. Not with the animosity from the other prisoners." Elizabeth began to weep softly, her grasp of English sufficient to comprehend their perilous situation. Maria clasped her hand, murmuring reassurances she herself barely believed. Outside, the sounds of other prisoners' arguments grew louder, more hostile, piercing the darkness. The 3 women huddled together, acutely aware that the coming day might unleash an inescapable violence. The following morning, an unexpected visitor arrived at Colonel Patterson's office. Thomas's 3rd-generation German-American farmer had diligently worked his land for 70 years. 8 months prior, he had suffered the devastating loss of his only son, David, in the Battle of the Bulge. Since the arrival of the telegram, his wife, Sarah, had barely uttered a word, spending her days staring out the kitchen window at the desolate fields. "I hear you're experiencing some difficulties with German prisoners," Muller stated quietly, his weathered hands clenching his hat. Patterson studied the man's face, where grief was deeply etched into every line. "Mr. Muller, what precisely are you proposing?" he inquired. "My farm is isolated, 20 miles from town. I possess secure outbuildings, and there's substantial work awaiting completion before winter. It's harvest season, and I'm severely short-handed." Muller paused, carefully choosing his words. "These women, they aren't genuine soldiers. They were simply caught up in something far larger than themselves." Patterson leaned back in his chair, contemplating this unprecedented request. The Army had previously experimented with labor programs for male posts, permitting them to work on farms under stringent supervision. However, female prisoners were a different matter. Regulations were vague, and the inherent risks unknown. The town won't look favorably on this, he cautioned. German prisoners housed in such close proximity to civilian families. The town needn't be informed. Muller responded, "My nearest neighbor is 5 miles distant. The women can labor during the day and sleep in the converted barn at night. I will assume full responsibility for their safety and conduct." He met Patterson's gaze with unwavering resolve. "Colonel, I've witnessed enough hatred to last a lifetime. Perhaps it's time to attempt something different." That afternoon, Maria, Anna, and Elizabeth once again boarded a military transport, but this time, mercifully, without restraints. Through the windows, they observed the Nebraska countryside unfurling vast expanses of corn and wheat fields, a landscape punctuated by red barns and farmhouses from whose chimneys smoke gracefully curled. It presented a stark contrast to the war-ravaged Germany they had left behind. "Where are they taking us?" Elizabeth whispered in German, her voice barely audible. None of them knew, but for the first time in months, Maria felt a stirring within her that transcended mere despair. The American soldiers guarding them appeared relaxed, even affable. One offered Maria a piece of chocolate, smiling at her fumbled thank you in broken English. Soon, the Muller farm emerged into view, reminiscent of a scene from a storybook. A 2-story white farmhouse with green shutters, nestled amidst tall oak trees, ablaze in crimson and gold. Beside it, a stout, freshly painted red barn stood sentinel. Chickens pecked placidly in the yard, and a black dog barked once, then wagged its tail as if greeting long-lost friends. Thomas Muller emerged from the house, followed by a gray-haired woman with gentle eyes. Sarah Muller observed the 3 German prisoners descending from the truck, perceiving not enemies, but exhausted, frightened young women. Her maternal instincts, dormant since David's death, unexpectedly reawakened. "This will be your accommodation," Muller explained in careful German, guiding them to the converted barn. Inside, they discovered 3 simple yet impeccably clean beds, a wash basin, and a small wood-burning stove. Compared to the crowded, hostile environment of the camp, it felt like an unforeseen luxury. "You will work from dawn until dusk," he continued, harvesting corn, tending the animals, preparing for winter. "In return, you will have food, shelter, and safety." Maria, the unspoken leader of their small group, stepped forward. "We understand, sir. We will work hard." Her English was hesitant, but distinctly clear. Nodded, then added something that astonished them all. "One more thing. My wife insists you dine with us tonight." He paused, then elaborated. "She says it wouldn't be Christian to allow guests to eat alone on their first night in a new place." The 3 women exchanged uncertain glances. They had braced themselves for arduous labor, harsh treatment, ebb and beyond. They were entirely unprepared for such an overt display of kindness. Elizabeth clutched her wooden crucifix, wondering if this was some form of test or an insidious trap. As dusk settled, they stood hesitantly at the farmhouse door. Through the windows, they could see warm lights glowing and smell the inviting aromas of cooking roast chicken, freshly baked bread, and a sweet scent that reminded Maria of her own mother's kitchen. Sarah Muller opened the door before they could knock, the first genuine smile in months gracing her face. "Come in, girls," she said simply. "Dinner's ready." After months spent in frigid barracks and beneath hostile gazes, the dining room felt overwhelmingly warm and welcoming. A long wooden table was elegantly set with real china plates, cloth napkins, and silverware that gleamed softly in the lamplight. At its center lay a feast that brought tears to the women's eyes. Roast chicken, creamy mashed potatoes, fresh green beans from the garden, warm bread still steaming from the oven, and an apple pie cooling on the windowsill. Thomas Muller offered a prayer in English before the meal, and the 3 German women respectfully bowed their heads. Afterward, Sarah began passing dishes around the table, treating them as cherished family members, not enemy prisoners. "Maria, isn't it?" she inquired, serving the young woman a generous portion of chicken. "What a beautiful name." "It was my grandmother's." Conversation commenced slowly, a delicate patchwork of broken English and patient, repeated phrases. Elizabeth discovered that Sarah Muller had been a teacher before her marriage and retained sufficient German from her university courses to effectively bridge the communication gap. Anna, a skilled seamstress from Berlin, admired the intricate embroidery on Sarah's tablecloth. Gradually, the tension around the table began to dissipate. "Do you have children?" Maria asked hesitantly, noticing a framed photograph on the sideboard depicting a young man in an American military uniform. The question instantly plunged the table into a profound silence. Thomas and Sarah exchanged a look heavy with sorrow. "We had a son," Sarah said softly. "David. He was killed in Belgium last winter." She reached for the photograph, holding it gently. "He was 23. Your age, I think." Elizabeth's hand instinctively moved to her crucifix. She comprehended the universal ache of loss, even before the words were translated. The truth hung in the air, like a palpable presence. These people had lost their only child to German bullets, yet here they sat, offering sustenance and shelter to German prisoners. A wave of shame washed over Maria, swiftly followed by profound confusion. Everything she had been indoctrinated to believe about Americans, that they were cruel, godless, materialistic, seemed to crumble in the face of this simple, overwhelming act of grace. "I'm so sorry," Anna whispered in English, tears streaming down her face. "So very sorry." Sarah reached across the table, covering the young woman's hand with her own. In that singular moment, nationality, language, and politics evaporated, leaving only shared human grief and the profound possibility of healing. Outside, the first flakes of autumn snow began their gentle descent, blanketing the Nebraska landscape in pristine white. Inside the warm farmhouse, 3 German prisoners and 2 American parents sat around a table, discovering that kindness could still flourish, even after the world's most terrible war. In the ensuing weeks, the Muller farm underwent transformations none of them had foreseen. Each day at sunrise, Maria, Anna, and Elizabeth joined Thomas in the fields, their hands growing calloused from stripping corn and carrying heavy baskets. The physical labor was arduous, yet it imparted a profound sense of purpose they had never experienced in their military service. They were constructing, not destroying. Elizabeth, in particular, displayed a remarkable affinity for the farm animals. The chickens, initially wary of strangers, began to follow her around the yard like devoted pets. She discovered a natural talent for coaxing milk from Bessie, a notoriously cantankerous cow that had troubled Thomas for months. "She just needs a gentle touch," Elizabeth explained in her improving English, carefully stroking the cow's flank. As winter approached, Anna's exceptional sewing skills became invaluable. Sarah always had a steady supply of fabric scraps and worn clothing requiring mending, and Anna worked nightly by the kerosene lamp, transforming old garments into usable items. Her nimble fingers expertly repaired torn work shirts, reinforced overalls, and even crafted warm mittens from discarded wool sweaters. "In Berlin, we learned to make everything count," she confided to Sarah one evening. Nothing could be wasted during the war. With dedicated English lessons becoming a regular part of their routine, the language barrier gradually diminished. Sarah proved to be an exceptional teacher, utilizing objects around the farm to expand their vocabulary. "Hammer," she would enunciate, holding up the tool. "Nail, wood, to build." The women absorbed each new word eagerly, understanding that language was their essential pathway to navigating this unfamiliar world. However, it was Maria who surprised everyone most. One evening, as Sarah wrestled with the farm's ledgers under the dim kitchen light, Maria quietly approached and courteously pointed out a calculation error. "Numbers? The same in German," she said shyly. It transpired that Maria had studied accounting before the war, and her precise mathematical prowess was precisely what the struggling farm desperately needed. The first significant test of their unconventional arrangement arrived unannounced one October afternoon, in the person of Sheriff Henry Dobson. It was a tall, stern man with eyes full of palpable suspicion. Rumors of German prisoners had reached him, and he had come to conduct a personal investigation. Thomas met him in the yard, his jaw set with quiet determination. "I simply wish to see these prisoners for myself," Dobson stated, his hand resting meaningfully on his gun belt. "They are workers, not prisoners," Thomas replied firmly. "They possess official papers from the army, and they are earning their keep." As if to underscore his point, Elizabeth emerged from the chicken coop, a basket of fresh eggs in her hand. trailed by her usual retinue of hens. She offered the sheriff a shy smile, and he appeared momentarily taken aback by her cheerful demeanor. Anna appeared next, hanging newly mended clothes on the line, while Maria could be seen through the kitchen window, assisting Sarah in preparing preserves for winter. The scene was so profoundly domestic and serene that Sheriff Dobson's suspicions began to waver. These were clearly not the dangerous enemy agents he had anticipated finding. "The town is buzzing," he quietly warned Thomas. "Some folks believe you're too trusting. They recalled what these Germans inflicted upon our boys overseas." Thomas nodded gravely, comprehending the weight of community opinion. What transpired overseas and what these women are genuinely like might be two distinctly different things, he responded. "Besides, they're helping us navigate the winter." Sarah hasn't smiled like this since David died. That night, as the sheriff's car vanished down the dusty road, the three women gathered nervously in their converted barn quarters. They had understood enough of the conversation to grasp that their situation remained profoundly precarious. "We must be flawless," Maria instructed the others in German. "Any mistake, any single complaint, and they will send us back to the camp." They all knew precisely what awaited them there. Pervasive hostility, potential violence, and an utterly uncertain fate. Outside, they could discern the warm lights of the farmhouse kitchen, where Thomas and Sarah were earnestly discussing their future over evening coffee. For the first time since their capture, they felt they possessed something truly worth fighting for and protecting. November ushered in the season's first significant snowfall, and with it, a critical crisis that would rigorously test everyone's resolve. A howling blizzard struck without warning. The tempest buried the farm under 3 feet of snow and severed telephone lines 4 miles around. While attempting to check on the livestock during the height of the storm, Thomas slipped on a hidden patch of ice, suffering a severely broken leg. Sarah found him unconscious in the barn, his leg twisted at an unnatural, alarming angle. Unable to call for help and with roads rendered impassable, she faced a terrifying, solitary decision. The nearest doctor was 15 miles away in town, and even if she could miraculously reach him, he likely couldn't navigate the blizzard. Thomas urgently required immediate medical attention, but moving him improperly could catastrophically worsen his injury. It was Maria who decisively took charge of the crisis. "I have assisted doctors during the German air raids," she explained to Sarah, her English clipped but clear, imbued with an undeniable urgency. "I understand fractures." Indeed, prior to her communications assignment, Maria had served as a medical auxiliary, helping overworked doctors tend to the wounded in makeshift hospitals during the nightly Allied bombings of Berlin. By the flickering light of a kerosene lamp in the barn, Maria meticulously examined Thomas's injury, while Anna and Elizabeth efficiently prepared makeshift medical supplies, utilizing torn bed sheets for bandages and sturdy wooden planks from an apple crate for a splint. Maria expertly and efficiently immobilized the injured leg. Her hands were remarkably steady and sure, guided by training she had fervently hoped never to employ again. "We must move him to the house," Maria instructed Sarah. "It is warm, clean, and significantly better for healing." The 4 women worked cohesively, fashioning a stretcher from a barn door and ropes, then carefully transported Thomas through the deep snow to the farmhouse. Sarah watched in profound awe as these 3 German women, legally still prisoners of war, risked their own safety and well-being to save her husband's life. For 3 days, as the blizzard relentlessly raged, Maria assiduously nursed Thomas around the clock. She vigilantly monitored his temperature, adjusted his splint with precision, and administered pain medication from Sarah's cabinet. Anna tirelessly kept the fire burning to maintain vital warmth, while Elizabeth repeatedly braved the brutal elements to tend to the livestock, ensuring the animals neither froze nor starved. When the storm finally abated and the roads were eventually cleared, Dr. Robert Harrison arrived, fully expecting a dire medical emergency. Instead, he discovered Thomas comfortable, his leg expertly set, and recovering remarkably well. Whoever performed this work knew precisely what they were doing, he told Sarah admiringly. Likely saved him from permanent disability, perhaps even his life. The doctor's words quickly circulated throughout the small farming community. Within a week, other farmers began to arrive at the Mueller home, no longer with suspicion or hostility, but with genuine requests for help. Mrs. Peterson needed someone to mend her late husband's winter clothes. The Andersons' cow was gravely sick and refusing to eat. Old Mr. Jorgensen's ledgers hadn't balanced in months. Thomas and Sarah considered each request thoughtfully, understanding they walked a delicate line between community acceptance and strict federal regulations. But gradually, an unspoken understanding began to solidify. The three German women were no longer merely prisoners. They were neighbors, invaluable contributors to a community collectively struggling to endure the harsh Nebraska winter. Elizabeth, in particular, thrived in this newly defined role. Her gentle, almost magical way with animals became legendary among the local farmers, who began bringing their most stubborn livestock to the Muller farm specifically for her care. Anna's sewing circle expanded to include several farm wives, all of whom profoundly admired her skill with even the most challenging mending projects. Maria's precise accounting assistance saved 3 families from potential bankruptcy during an unusually difficult harvest season. Yet, this very success also brought forth new challenges. Word of the unusual arrangement eventually reached military authorities, who began raising troubling questions regarding the proper supervision of enemy prisoners. Colonel Patterson received explicit orders for a formal inspection of the labor program. With rumors circulating that Washington was growing increasingly concerned about setting an unprecedented precedent, the 3 women acutely sensed the shift in atmosphere, their anxiety about their future intensifying dramatically. They had discovered something truly precious at the Muller farm: purpose, dignity, and a tangible glimpse of what post-war life could genuinely be. The mere thought of losing it all filled them with a despair more profound than anything they had experienced even in the darkest days of military captivity. Christmas of 1945 brought forth unexpected challenges, severely testing the bonds forged over the preceding months. Military investigators had been conducting rigorous inquiries throughout the county, asking pointed questions about the German prisoners and their highly unconventional living arrangement. Local public opinion remained sharply divided, while many farmers genuinely appreciated the women's invaluable contributions. Others questioned the prudence of treating enemy prisoners with such overt kindness. The 3 women keenly felt the escalating pressure. They had grown genuinely fond of the Mullers and the small farming community, but they also fully understood their precarious legal status. As enemy aliens, they possessed no rights beyond those explicitly granted by military authorities, and those authorities were now expressing growing concern over this unconventional labor program. As Christmas drew near, Sarah Muller faced her own agonizing decision. For the first time since David's death, she felt ready to truly celebrate the holiday, but she worried deeply about the community's reaction to including German prisoners in traditional festivities. The local pastor had already voiced concerns about the Christian appropriateness of such close association with former enemies. The crises dramatically culminated when Elizabeth fell gravely ill with pneumonia. The young woman had been working outdoors in the harsh December weather, diligently tending to sick animals despite developing a persistent cough herself. By Christmas Eve, she was suffering from a raging fever and struggling desperately to breathe. Dr. Harrison bravely navigated fresh snow to examine her, his expression grim as he listened to her labored breathing. "She urgently needs to be in a proper hospital," he privately informed Thomas and Sarah. "Her lungs are severely congested, and I simply do not possess the necessary equipment here to properly treat pneumonia. The county hospital in Lincoln has the facilities she needs, but," he paused meaningfully, "transporting a German prisoner to a civilian hospital would require military approval, and that could consume days we simply do not have." Maria and Anna kept a constant vigil at Elizabeth's bedside, taking turns applying cool cloths to her burning forehead and coaxing sips of water. The young woman drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes murmuring in German about her grandmother and the cherished wooden crucifix she still clutched firmly in her hand, even in her feverish delirium. It was Maria who ultimately offered Thomas a desperate, unconventional suggestion. "There is a German medicine," she said hesitantly. "My grandmother, Situetme, with plants, herbs, for breathing sickness." She explained that her grandmother had been a traditional healer in rural Bavaria, and Maria had learned some of her remedies as a child. Utilizing untested folk remedies on a gravely ill patient was undeniably a risk, but conventional treatment seemed utterly impossible. Together, Maria and Sarah painstakingly scoured the winter fields for the specific herbs. Maria remembered willow bark for fever, pine needles for respiratory relief, and wild mint still growing resiliently in sheltered spots near the farmhouse. They brewed potent teas and administered steam treatments, a profound fusion of German folk wisdom and American compassionate care. For 3 agonizing days, Elizabeth remained in critical condition. Thomas sat faithfully by her bedside, reading calming passages from the Bible, while Sarah softly hummed gentle lullabies that gracefully transcended language barriers. Anna prayed fervently in German, and Maria applied her grandmother's remedies with unwavering determination. The farmhouse transformed into a sanctuary, where nationality mattered far less than profound human compassion. On December 27th, Elizabeth's fever finally broke. For the first time in days, she awoke, weakly asking for water and managing a few spoonfuls of Sarah's nourishing chicken broth. Dr. Harrison arrived for his daily check, marveling openly at her remarkable recovery. "I've witnessed many cases of pneumonia," he told the gathered family. "Most patients her age and condition, without hospital treatment, do not survive." Elizabeth's near-fatal encounter deeply affected everyone. Thomas and Sarah realized how profoundly they had invested themselves in these 3 young women, seeing them no longer as temporary workers but as cherished, adopted daughters. Maria and Anna understood that their friend's recovery was far more than a mere medical success. It powerfully symbolized the triumph of cooperation across traditional lines of enmity. However, Elizabeth's illness also attracted unwelcome attention. 2 days after Christmas, military investigators arrived, drawn by the unauthorized medical report and deeply concerned about liability. The delicate balance they had maintained for months was about to face its most severe and decisive test. Led by Major Robert Sterling, a meticulous officer profoundly skeptical of the Muller-Farm arrangement, the military inspection team arrived on a cold January morning. Accompanying him were a military physician, a legal affairs officer, and a stenographer, meticulously tasked with documenting any perceived infractions in the treatment of enemy prisoners. "Mr. Major Sterling began formally, his tone rigid. We have received reports that you are operating outside the established parameters of the prisoner labor program, specifically alleging that these enemy aliens have been afforded lodging and privileges beyond what military regulations authorize." His inflection clearly suggested he had already predetermined his conclusions about what he expected to discover. Thomas and Sarah stood resolutely on the front porch, watching as the inspection team rigorously scrutinized every single aspect of the women's living quarters. The converted barn was measured, photographed, and painstakingly compared against official standards for prisoner-of-war housing. Investigators precisely noted the comfortable beds, the wood-burning stove, and the small personal items the women had accumulated, all deemed potential violations of regulations, explicitly designed to maintain a clear distinction between captor and captive. Maria, Anna, and Elizabeth stood silently in the farmyard, acutely aware that their entire future hinged on the outcome of this inspection. They wore their most conservative clothes and had tidied their quarters with military-level precision. Yet, they also understood implicitly that the investigators were actively seeking justifications to terminate the program, not to sanction it. The medical officer's examination of Elizabeth proved particularly contentious. "This prisoner received unauthorized medical attention," he declared after meticulously reviewing Dr. Harrison's notes, "using folk remedies and unapproved therapeutic interventions, a clear violation of established medical protocol for enemy detainees." The undeniable fact of Elizabeth's miraculous recovery was evidently considered less important than the bureaucratic infractions involved in her treatment. As the hours elapsed, Major Sterling's questioning grew increasingly incisive. "Mr. Muller, these prisoners have been regularly dining with your family. They have been interacting freely with civilian neighbors. They have been granted access to private financial records." Each statement felt like a direct accusation, and Thomas found himself earnestly defending decisions that had, at the time, seemed both natural and profoundly compassionate. The situation reached a critical inflection point when the legal affairs officer discovered Sarah's informal English lessons. Teaching enemy aliens to improve their communication skills could be construed as aiding and abetting the enemy, he stated gravely. "These women will eventually be repatriated to Germany, and any skills they acquire here could potentially be used against American interests in the future." Ultimately, it was Elizabeth who courageously broke the tense silence that followed. Despite her recent severe illness and still limited English, she stepped forward and addressed Major Sterling directly. "Sir," she began carefully, her voice gaining strength with each word. We are not enemies now. The war is over. We helped the farm. We helped neighbors. We helped the family who lost their son for Germany. She continued, her voice resonating with conviction. Thomas and Sarah Muller. They teach us that forgiveness is possible. That kindness is stronger than hatred. Anna joined her, speaking with newfound confidence in her improved English. Before coming here, I truly believed Americans were cruel, selfish people. But this family, they show us a different truth. They lost their son to German bullets, but they still give us food, care for us when we are sick, treat us like daughters. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she added, "How can this possibly be wrong?" Maria stepped forward lost, her accounting background evident in her organized and articulate defense. Major Sterling in 3 months here. We collectively helped save over $2,000 worth of harvest. We directly helped 3 neighboring families avoid bankruptcy. We cared for sick animals, mended clothes, balanced ledgers, saved money. She paused, then added softly, "But most importantly, we learned that peace must inherently begin with individual choices to see humanity in former enemies." The 3 women stood together, no longer appearing as defeated prisoners, but as confident, articulate young women who had discovered profound purpose and dignity in unexpectedly nurturing circumstances. Their remarkable transformation was evident not just in their significantly improved English and practical skills, but in their upright posture, their newfound self-assurance, and their clear, profound affection for the family who had so graciously taken them in. Major Sterling found himself grappling with a situation his extensive military training had utterly ill-prepared him for. Regulations unequivocally indicated that the arrangement brazenly violated numerous established protocols. Yet, the tangible outcomes were undeniably positive. The women were active, productive contributors to the local economy. They posed no conceivable security threat, and had demonstrably transitioned from potential adversaries to constructive, integrated community members. The inspection team withdrew to deliberate, leaving the Mullers and the 3 German women to anxiously await a verdict that would determine if this unprecedented experiment in post-war reconciliation would be permitted to continue. 3 days later, the official verdict arrived in the form of a formal telegram, which Thomas read aloud to the gathered family. Prisoner labor program at Muller Farm terminated immediately. Prisoners to be transferred to designated repatriation facility pending return to Germany. Military transport scheduled for January 15th, 1946. The news landed like a devastating blow to everyone present. Sarah began to weep silently, while Thomas remained in stunned silence, the telegram trembling visibly in his weathered hands. The 3 German women had intellectually anticipated this outcome, but the harsh reality of impending separation was still utterly heartbreaking. In 6 transformative months, they had collectively built something precious, a collective unit that felt unmistakably like family, a renewed sense of purpose, and a glimmer of hope for a future beyond the devastation of war. Elizabeth was the first to speak, her English now confident enough to articulate complex emotions with clarity. "We knew this day would come," she said, her voice firm despite her tears. "But we hoped." She didn't complete the sentence, but all understood implicitly. They had all harbored secret dreams that somehow, impossibly, this extraordinary arrangement might become permanent. The following week passed in a flurry of desperate, heartfelt activity. Sarah diligently taught the women advanced cooking techniques they could utilize in Germany. Anna meticulously completed final mending projects for local families, leaving small tokens of gratitude and goodwill throughout the Muller farm. Maria frantically organized the farm's intricate financial records, ensuring Thomas and Sarah could manage effectively without her invaluable mathematical assistance. Local farmers began arriving with thoughtful gifts and poignant farewell mementos, small, tangible items that would help the women remember their cherished time in Nebraska. Mrs. Peterson brought homemade preserves. The Andersons generously donated a warm wool scarf that Anna had openly admired. Old Mr. Jorgensen, whose tangled ledgers Maria had helped painstakingly unravel, arrived with a leather-bound notebook meticulously filled with accounting techniques she might find profoundly useful in Germany. Dr. Harrison made a special trip to personally confirm Elizabeth's full recovery and provided a comprehensive medical certificate meticulously documenting her treatment. "You saved her life," he told Maria privately, his voice firm. "Don't let anyone tell you what transpired here was wrong. Medicine is fundamentally about healing people, not slavishly following bureaucratic protocols." The most emotionally difficult moment came as Thomas and Sarah presented each woman with a carefully chosen, deeply personal gift. For Ayana, they had commissioned a professional sewing kit, complete with high-quality shears, needles, and Thimble's premium tools that would undeniably aid her in restarting her tailoring career in Germany. Elizabeth received a small leather-bound Bible with text thoughtfully presented in both English and German, alongside a touching photograph of her feeding the chickens on the farm. For Maria, they had prepared something truly extraordinary. A formal letter of recommendation meticulously detailing her exceptional accounting skills, along with crucial contact information for Thomas's brother, who worked for an international company with offices in Germany. "When you are ready to begin anew," Thomas explained gently, "show this to potential employers. It might significantly help you find a good position." But the most precious gift was intangible, fundamentally altering the way the three women viewed themselves and their rightful place in the world. They had arrived as defeated enemies, shattered by war and the crushing weight of captivity. They left as confident, capable young women, armed with practical skills, significantly improved language abilities, and, most importantly, a profound, unshakable understanding that, given the right circumstances, former enemies could genuinely become family. On their final evening, Sarah lovingly prepared one last family dinner, featuring all their favorite American dishes. Now, conversation flowed effortlessly, German and English gracefully interweaving, as the women shared cherished memories of their time on the farm. Thomas offered a heartfelt prayer of thanksgiving, acknowledging the unexpected blessings their presence had brought to the family, and wishing them safe passage home to courageously rebuild their lives. As midnight approached on January 14th, the three women sat quietly in their converted barn quarters, meticulously packing the few belongings they were permitted to take. Elizabeth still clutched her grandmother's wooden crucifix, but now it rested alongside a small Bible and the precious photograph from the Mullers. Anna carefully wrapped her new sewing supplies in the fabric scraps Sarah had insisted she'll take. Maria safeguarded her vital letter of recommendation and the invaluable notebook from Mr. Jorgensen. Outside, snow fell softly on the Nebraska land they had grown to love and call, for a time, their own. In the morning, a military transport would arrive to take them to a repatriation facility, commencing their long journey back to Germany. Germany they might barely recognize after years of relentless war and crushing defeat, but they were no longer the frightened, broken prisoners who had arrived 6 months earlier. They had learned that profound healing was indeed possible, that former enemies could genuinely become family, and that individual, courageous acts of kindness could triumph over deeply ingrained institutional hatred. Above all, they carried living, irrefutable proof that peace was not merely the absence of war, but the tangible, transformative presence of mutual understanding among people who chose, against all odds, to see humanity in one another. The Mola Farm had given them far more than mere food and shelter. It had given them enduring hope for the future and a profound, living model for how the world might genuinely be rebuilt on a foundation of forgiveness and mutual respect.